Somebody in a shipyard in China just launched a vessel bigger than 4 football fields, built specifically to carry cars nobody in America is allowed to buy. Sit with that for a second. A car company most Americans associate with cheap electric vehicles just became one of the largest private ship owners on Earth, and the United States Navy is watching it happen. Not because of the cars, because of what those ships represent. America is not paying attention to BYD because of its vehicles. It is paying attention because of what BYD represents. A single company in less than 3 years went from renting space on other people's boats to owning and operating a fleet capable of moving over 1 million vehicles a year across every ocean on the planet. And that fleet did not appear out of nowhere. It appeared because an entire nation decided that controlling the sea was just as important as controlling the factory floor. Here is the story nobody is telling you. This was never really about electric cars. It was about who owns the roads that do not touch land. It was about who controls the invisible highways that decide whether a nation can feed its economy, arm its military, and outlast its rivals in a crisis. And by that measure, the real headline is not that BYD builds good cars. It is that China quietly built the largest merchant navy the modern world has ever seen. And almost nobody outside a handful of Pentagon briefings noticed until it was already done. Rewind to 2023. Chinese automakers were sitting on mountains of unsold electric vehicles with nowhere to put them. The problem was not demand. Europeans wanted the cars. Latin Americans wanted the cars. The problem was that China only owned a tiny sliver of the world's car-carrying ships, something close to 3 out of every 100 available slots. Every other slot belonged to Japanese, Norwegian, or Korean shipping companies who were, understandably, in no rush to help a competitor flood the market. Waiting lists for carrier space stretched past half a year. Imagine building a car in 3 weeks and then watching it sit in a parking lot for 6 months because there was no boat available to take it anywhere. So BYD did something almost no car company in history has done. It stopped waiting for someone else's ship and started building its own. Between January of 2024 and October of 2025, 8 vessels rolled out of Chinese shipyards under the BYD name. The first one could carry around 4,000 cars. The last ones launched carrying over 9,000 vehicles each, briefly making one of them the largest car-carrying ship ever built. Put together, that fleet can move more than 67,000 vehicles in a single combined voyage and over 1 million vehicles across a full year. That is not a shipping upgrade. That is a company deciding it no longer needs anyone's permission to reach the rest of the world. But here is where the story stops being about one company and starts being about something much larger. BYD did not build these ships in a vacuum. It built them inside the most dominant shipbuilding industry the world has seen since the days when American shipyards worked around the clock during the Second World War. Chinese shipyards captured somewhere between 69 and 71% of every new global shipbuilding order placed in 2024 and 2025. When it comes specifically to car-carrying vessels like BYD's fleet, Chinese yards grabbed over 80% of new orders. Picture an industry so overwhelming that 4 out of every 5 new vehicles built to move cars across oceans came from a single country's shipyards. That is not competition. That is near total control of a critical piece of global infrastructure. Now ask yourself why this matters beyond spreadsheets and shipping schedules. Over 80% of everything traded on this planet, by volume, travels by sea. Not by plane, not by train, by ship. Batteries, minerals, electronics, food, fuel, weapons parts, all of it moves in the belly of a vessel that was built somewhere, is owned by somebody, and sails under somebody's flag. Whoever builds the most ships and owns the most fleets does not just win a business advantage, they gain leverage over the arteries that keep every other economy alive. China understood this decades before most Western governments started paying attention. This is the point where the story quietly slides from economics into something the United States Navy cares about deeply. A commercial shipyard and a military shipyard are not as separate as they sound. China State Shipbuilding Corporation, the massive state-owned company behind much of this boom, builds cargo ships, oil tankers, and car carriers in the very same yards, often using the very same engineers, welders, and production lines that also produce warships, destroyers, and amphibious assault vessels. One report from a well-respected Washington think tank noted that this single Chinese company built more commercial shipping tonnage in 2024 than the entire American shipbuilding industry has produced since the end of World War II. Read that again. One company, 1 year, more than 8 decades of American output combined. This is what military planners call dual-use infrastructure, and it has a long, uncomfortable history. During the Second World War, the American Merchant Marine was nicknamed the fourth arm of defense because commercial sailors moved troops, tanks, and fuel across oceans under constant threat of attack. Roughly 1 in every 26 of those merchant mariners died in service, a casualty rate higher than the Army, the Navy, or the Marines. Decades later, during the Gulf War, ordinary commercial ships quietly moved around 90% of all military equipment and supplies to the Persian Gulf. Wars are not won only by fighter jets and aircraft carriers. They are won by whoever can move the most material to the right place at the right time. And that has always depended on commercial shipping capacity sitting quietly in the background. This is exactly why the numbers coming out of China unsettle people inside the Pentagon. According to United States Navy assessments, China's total shipbuilding capacity is now estimated at over 200 times that of the United States. 200 times. China also now operates more warships in raw numbers than the American Navy, even though the United States still holds an edge in larger, more advanced vessels like cruisers and destroyers. But here's the deeper worry articulated by analysts at a leading national security think tank. Foreign companies, including American and European firms, purchased around 75% of the ships built at China's dual-use shipyards between 2019 and 2024. Every time a foreign buyer orders a commercial vessel from one of these yards, they are, often unknowingly, helping fund the very same production lines that build China's Navy. One expert described it plainly. Commercial shipbuilding revenue is effectively subsidizing military expansion. Meanwhile, the United States has been trying to patch a leak with a much smaller bucket. The Maritime Administration, known as MARAD, oversees a reserve fleet of around 40 vessels meant to be ready for rapid deployment within a matter of days during a national emergency. In mid-2025, the government awarded a contract worth over $6 billion just to maintain and modernize 51 aging reserve ships. There is also a separate program keeping about 60 United States-flagged commercial vessels on standby for the Department of Defense. It sounds substantial until you place it next to a country building the equivalent of America's entire post-war shipbuilding output in a single calendar year. So now picture the full chessboard, because this is where all the pieces start moving together. China controls over 70% of the world's lithium battery production. China's battery exports alone generated around $60 billion in a single recent year. China exported more than 8 million vehicles in 2025, with electric vehicles making up a rapidly growing share. And by June of 2026, monthly vehicle exports crossed 1 million units for the first time in history. None of those batteries and none of those cars reach a foreign buyer without a ship. And increasingly, those ships are Chinese-built, Chinese-owned, and sailing out of Chinese-controlled ports, some of which sit on foreign soil thanks to years of infrastructure investment across Europe, Africa, and Latin America. This is the moment the puzzle clicks into place. Manufacturing, batteries, shipbuilding, and port ownership are no longer 4 separate industries competing on 4 separate playing fields. They have merged into a single integrated system, and China currently holds a commanding position in nearly every layer of it. BYD's fleet did not create this system. BYD's fleet is simply the most visible, most photogenic proof that the system already exists and is already working exactly as intended. So here is the uncomfortable question worth sitting with before the next commercial break in your own head. If a car company can build a private navy of 9 ships in under 2 years just to move vehicles more efficiently, what happens when that same industrial machine decides to build something other than cars? Is the West actually behind in a race it does not fully realize it is running? Or is this just the natural cost of decades spent outsourcing manufacturing to the country that eventually decided to also build the ships that carry it home? None of this means BYD is squaring off against the United States Navy in any direct sense. That claim simply is not supported by the evidence. What the evidence does support is something arguably more important. BYD is a mirror. It reflects a much larger transformation already reshaping global power, one where the deciding factor is no longer just who builds the best product, but who controls the infrastructure that moves every product, every battery, and eventually every strategic resource across the planet. The electric vehicle race convinced the entire world to watch battery chemistry, range numbers, and charging speeds. While everyone stared at the cars, the real contest quietly moved out to sea. The next industrial superpower may not be decided by who builds the best vehicle on the road. It may be decided by who controls the infrastructure that moves the world's economy. One ship, one port, and one shipping lane at a time. If this changed the way you look at your own garage, or made you wonder what else is shifting beneath the surface of an industry you thought you understood, that is exactly why we do this. To not be caught off guard by what is coming next in this industry, join us.